while in decapitated science the sun is regarded to be an invariable constant. In the real world, this is far from being the case. The luminance of the sun already varies by a factor of 20 in the high UV band during the course of the 11-year solar cycles. If we look through the holes of the photosphere in the sun, which the sunspots provide as they expose the lower layers, we see a much colder sun at those lower layers. What we see suggests that the sun was much colder during the long glaciation period. It might have been as cold as 3000 degrees Kelvin. In this context, the current sun is an anomaly, with the sun being much dimmer during the cold interglacial climates. The changing luminance of the sun appears to be one of the most critical elements of the Ice Age transition, and the hardest one to accept, even while nothing else makes any sense. The steep drop-off in temperature that the ice core data indicates in the boundary region to the previous Ice Age could not be possible in the theorized entropic universe where the sun is regarded as a steady-state fusion furnace, burning by its own fuel. This enigma doesn't exist in the anti-entropic universe where the sun is electrically powered, where large fluctuations are not only possible but are expected as boundary phenomena of a powerful electric system changing from a high-intensity state to a low-intensity state. A potential cause for large and sudden fluctuations in the power of the sun might be a sudden rupturing of the heliosphere, similar to the rupturing of the solar photosphere that causes mass ejections and leaves sunspots in the wake. The Ulysses satellite saw the solar wind pressure reduced by 20% over the space of a decade, and saw cosmic ray numbers increased by the same percentage as a result of a weaker heliosphere. However, we have absolutely no way of telling what the result will be when the solar wind pressure becomes reduced significantly further. Will then the heliosphere begin to rupture? And if so, what will be the electrodynamic effect of such an event? The heliosphere is an integrated part of the electric system that powers the sun. The heliosphere feeds the heliospheric current sheet, in which plasma flows back into the sun. If a rupture occurs, a portion of the solar system's plasma might be vented into space, causing a sharp, sudden reduction in solar plasma density and solar activity that may not heal itself until the incoming stellar plasma density becomes enriched again with the next interglacial warm pulse. It may well be that we face such an implosive type of rapid fluctuation in which the dynamics of the heliosphere become flipped to a lesser energetic state. The Polish ice core researcher, the late Dr. Zbigniew Jaworowski, speaking from the background of his 50-year career in scientific research, suggested in a 2003 paper, The Ice Age is Coming, that we might see a huge transition happening in as short a time as a single year, or that it might be as long as 50 years, and that the transition event might begin at any time and without any warning. He points out that the Earth has been in the time frame where a transition should be expected, for a few centuries already. The rupturing of the heliosphere could facilitate the kind of large-scale transition event that he suggests we should expect to see happening. Large efforts are being made to study how the solar system operates, but observing the present state doesn't necessarily offer us a looking glass into the future. The Ulysses satellite gave us a hint, but it was turned off when the data contradicted the global warming doctrine. Here we find the most critical question rooted for the future of humanity. If we fail in recognizing the Ice Age dynamics, and the sun becomes affected by rapidly changing conditions that cause it to go dimmer in a short time span, as Jaworowski suggests is possible, such as which might happen if the heliosphere ruptures, then much of humanity would be doomed as a result of our ignoring reality that leads to false predictions, such as the current prediction that our interglacial warm period will last another 1,000 years or more. In the electric universe, conditions can change rapidly. We cannot ignore the fact that the universe is electrically powered and is anti-anthropic in nature. Gigantic electric discharge events have been observed high in the stratosphere, up to 100 kilometers high, feeding into the thunderclouds deep below them. The central core and ring structure shown here, called a sprite, is typical for large-scale discharge events. These shapes have been replicated in the laboratory. They become rather amazing structures at high current densities. The plasma physics researcher Anthony Parrott, associated with Los Alamos National Laboratory in the USA, discovered archetypal drawings from distant times that reflect the laboratory-created plasma discharge shapes. They appear to have been seen in the sky because such drawings were produced in widely separated areas of the world. If the recorded shapes were plasma flow events seen in the sky, they would likely have been seen associated with the sun at times of great mass ejections, and they would have stood out easily visible. The existence of these drawings suggests that the phenomena were observed in periods of a dimmer sun. Normally, the solar plasma flows are invisible. Against today's bright sun, they cannot be seen in the visible light band. Plasma flows are presently just barely visible during the relative darkness of a total solar eclipse, as the one shown here, photographed by the famous eclipse photographer Miroslav Druckenmiller. In the times of a dimmer sun, however, and in times of stronger mass ejections, the resulting plasma flow events would have been readily visible to the unaided eye. The dimmer daylight would not have blotted them out, as would be the case in today's bright sunlight. The phenomena were probably observed a few days prior to cataclysmic events and were therefore recorded as significant signs to watch for. They might have been regarded as warning signs from the gods, prior to the occurrence of massive earthquakes. By recognizing the signs, the people would have been able to seek higher ground and avoid deadly catastrophes. The people would have had up to 4 days to react. It takes typically up to 4 days for plasma mass ejections to shower the Earth. Only a few rare exceptions have taken less time. What the ancients saw in the sky, and primarily that they were able to see such phenomena at all with the unaided eye, adds a measure of confirmation that we will face a dimmer sun, together with a colder world during the next 90,000 to 100,000 years, before the interglacial resumes anew. The big open question thus is, how dim and how cold will the sun be? If one considers an average solar temperature in the 4,000 degree range during the glacial periods, the sun's energy luminance would then be roughly half of what it is today. In this case, the snow in the polar regions would no longer melt, whereby the great ice sheets would form anew. And even in the tropics, agricultural production would happen at a lower intensity, which will likely mean that we need substantially more agriculture than we now have, or go directly to high-intensity indoor agriculture with artificial sunlight. With this kind of potentially dramatic reduction in solar radiance, enormous changes lay before us as we enter the glaciation conditions again. While it is possible to create new platforms for agriculture in the tropics that can function well in the coming dimmer world, nothing will get done for as long as the world clings to decapitated science and remains tied down until it is too late to respond to the upcoming changing conditions. This means that decapitated science needs to be replaced with truthful science. This is the single most important key element in the strategic defense of humanity against the coming Ice Age conditions, without which humanity may become extinct. If the solar temperature drops down to 3,000 degrees, fully self-contained indoor agriculture with artificial sunlight and artificial environments may become a necessity. Together with artificially enhanced agriculture built afloat across the tropics. How cold will it get? We know from ice core sampled from Greenland that the previous glacial period had been 30 to 50 times colder than the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age gave us a half a degree cooling in comparison with the 15 to 20 degree cooling that the glaciation period had brought. But can we accurately forecast what this means for agriculture? We probably can't. The only safe option for the strategic defense of humanity against the coming Ice Age would be to prepare for the utmost possibility. Actually, it doesn't really matter how fast the Ice Age transition will take the Earth back to the deep glaciation state. Ice core samples from Greenland indicate that the previous deep transition took more than 1,000 years to unfold, or several thousand years. The samples also tell us that the glaciation period wasn't as stable as one would expect, but was a period of very large temperature oscillations near the end of it, with sudden warm spikes that reached nearly halfway back to the interglacial level, which then slowly dropped back off in the space of 400 to 600 years. It may well be that we will see these types of fast transitions reflected again during the transition period that has already begun, especially if one considers that the current interglacial epoch will be significantly colder than the previous one had been. We need to consider that the entire Pleistocene epoch in which the ice ages unfold is essentially getting progressively colder overall, because the two very long cycles, the 62 and 144 million year cycles, are both still moving towards their respective low point, which overlap. All this means that we have no actual historic data to use as yardstick for the coming transition period. Our present situation is unique in geologic time. However, do we really need to know how long it will take before the Earth will be 50 times colder than the Little Ice Age had been? Our primary concern has to be to determine at what stage agriculture becomes disabled in our northern food-producing regions, and at what point the northern hydroelectric power complexes stop operating when the snow no longer melts in the summer. During the Little Ice Age, that corresponds to half a degree cooling, agriculture was so severely affected throughout Europe that 10% of the population starved to death, and up to 30% in the northern regions. If the weakening of the sun continues that NASA's Ulysses satellite had measured the beginning of, we may be in a cooling trend towards 5 times colder climates than the Little Ice Age in 50 years' time or sooner. So how do we react? The human response would be to start a worldwide renaissance to develop the needed infrastructures to be able to relocate the entire northern agriculture into the tropic regions, where the new Ice Age climate cannot reach to, regardless of how fast it may unfold. Since there is little useful land in the tropics to absorb the vast northern agriculture, we have no choice but to create our own land by placing agriculture afloat onto the tropical seas. This can be done. With large-scale floating agriculture laid down across the equator and indoor agriculture in the marginal zones, a rich food supply is presently possible to be implemented for any size of population. This is easily done with nuclear-powered, automated, high-temperature industrial processes, utilizing basalt as a feedstock. In fact, this will be the fastest and easiest way to create new agriculture, and a new industrial revolution with it. Of course, we won't get anything done if we don't start. And the critical start won't happen until truthful science reveals the urgency sufficiently so that it can be acted on. This critical requirement that the future places on us renders truthful science one of the most critical moral requirements of our time. Anything less becomes a crime against the future, because by society's failing at the present critical stage, with the next 50 years becoming supercritical, humanity could become extinct. The liberation of science to truthful science needs to occur. Unfortunately, we are far from that. There is little intention existing, and much less a commitment to build on the already recognized urgency. people still keep on lulling themselves to sleep with the age-old song, "It won't happen to me. It won't happen in my time."